And we are live. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. And thank you, Andrew, for hopping on tonight. We have an exciting interview with Andrew D. Meredith, the author of Thrice. And you've got a brand new series out. There's the first book, Bonds of Promise. I'm so excited. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your new series?
Yeah, so I'm Andrew D. Meredith. I am an author now, and I've been writing. Well, I've been writing for a very long time. So probably all the way back to 2010 is when I could say I was really writing versus being a kid who thought he was going to write. And so I started writing in 2010. Wrote a really terrible version of Bonds of Promise back then, scrapped it, and walked away from it for almost 10 years. And then in 2017, I kind of went gung-ho into writing after having listened to the entire at that point 12 seasons of Writing Excuses. And the catchphrase is, now you're out of excuses, now go write. And I
Yeah,
finished
yeah.
12 seasons and I said, I'm out of excuses now, I have to go write. So I wrote actually Bonds of Promise, and at the time it was a 300,000 word manuscript, and started pitching it around, and of course that didn't work.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so basically what is coming out as book 1 through 6, it was the original master manuscript, and it was unwieldy. It needed work, lots of fever dreams on how to split the thing up and make it work as 2 books and then 6 books, and what is best for the readers, and ended up settling on releasing it as 6 books now after we switched to indie about a year and a half ago. We finally made the plunge and said, okay, we have time now, nothing else to do in the middle of COVID.
Mm.
So we learned everything we could about indie and made the dive, and now we're here.
So, what was that like as far as the querying? Because there's a lot of authors who are watching these who have mentioned that they're querying this year. Did you
Yeah.
get a lot of letters saying you'll have to cut it to 100,000? Or was it more just blatant rejections? Did you think about cutting it down and resubmitting it? What was that like for you?
I did eventually cut it. When I cut it into 2, I submitted to more agents at that point, and I just wasn't getting the bites for who knows what reasons. And there's always various reasons. Like I can pinpoint why Thrice didn't get picked up, and it was because it was being pitched literally 6 months before Witcher came out, and publishing has a 3-year wait time before your book comes out. And so I am convinced that this would be great. We're not going to get around to publishing this for 3 years, so you're going to miss your window. And so it was an opportunity to just publish it myself and say, let's try to jump on some kind of bandwagon, at least with season 2. With cutting it down, it's so difficult because you can never tell with an agent unless they actually give you a full response, whether their response is well, it was too long, and it was like, no, you weren't interested, can you just say that? No, okay, but they're not going to, because they've already responded, right? So in the end, you have to be true to yourself. If your book is 100,000 or 200,000 word manuscript, and that's how long it needs to be, that may be how long it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
It just may be a very different audience you're going to be pitching to, and it may not be traditional because they don't want longer, except when they do. And that's the thing, is that if it's really good and it's 300,000 words, Patrick Rothfuss was still discovered, and
Mm-hmm.
so it can still happen, but it is important to know yourself, and by that I mean you got to know when you got to tell yourself it's time to cut this thing up. It's time to make
Yeah.
it smaller, and sometimes that is switching to a new project. I switched from writing Collation over to writing, so the series is called Kallattian Cycle. But I switched from writing Collation while I was pitching it to writing Thrice because I needed something brand new that I could work on. And having
Mm-hmm.
done that allowed me to then separate myself from my babies so I could cut and make the changes I needed to for Collation, because I was now a better writer because I'd written a different book. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you gotta you don't have to trunk it, but you gotta set
Yeah.
it aside and work on something else for a little bit.
Just let it breathe. Let it breathe.
Exactly,
Because
exactly,
it's hard
which is
cutting
really
your
hard.
darlings.
It is, and it's hard to let it breathe too. But that's true of every hobby, no matter what you do. There's always going to be time when you have to wait for wait for the climax, wait for things to take off. It was like when I first started brewing beer, which was 6 years ago, and I haven't brewed in a year and a half now, but when you first brew, you're like, when's this beer gonna be done? It's gonna be like a
Mm-hmm.
month, so long. And it's like, now once you start making beer, then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to go bottle another beer. It's downstairs waiting for me, because you've got beer just always going. It's the same with books. You're waiting for the agents to respond. Write another book. You're waiting for sales to take off. Write another book. Do something totally different. Right now, I'm writing a satire just to act as a palate cleanser, and I wrote 5 chapters. I sent it to alphas and said, does this work? They said, yes, it does. And I said, okay, I'm going to wait a month and I'll work on it in October, because now I know, okay, this is something I could probably do if I needed to do something different. Now I have an option to let it breathe. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Just having yourself working on your hobby and not losing the fact that this is your hobby, this is something you love, even if you're getting rejections, and not letting those rejections like steal the joy out of your books.
it's
Um,
always hard. It is always
yeah.
hard. And it's no different if you're an indie and you're getting a 2-star review.
Oh,
It
yeah.
always hurts.
You can learn a lot from them. A lot
Yes,
of
you
the
do.
stuff from those
Yes,
one
you
and
do.
two stars. But
It's
yeah,
okay, and it's okay for it to hurt. And it's okay to, and you should have some friends that you can go and commiserate with, and then you get back up on the horse and you keep going.
exactly. So we know that you've got a lot of posts, or you had a lot of posts earlier this year when Brandon Sanderson announced that he was going to do
Mhm.
Kickstarter. And you also happened to have this 6-book series in the works
Yeah.
getting ready to come out around that time. And I loved how you embraced Brandon Sanderson's philosophy and going indie and use that to like fuel your launch. What is your feeling about Brandon Sanderson? Do you read his work?
I do. I do. There's always hit and miss, and I someone asked online the other day, what are your top 3 favorite fantasy novels? And I can't really honestly say what my favorites are, but I put Mistborn. If someone walked up to me and said, I want 3 fantasies, I'm never going to read another fantasy book in my life ever, I would say you should read Mistborn, because it's a great standalone. Yes, it's a series, but it's also it's just good, right? Lois McMaster Bujold's Curse of Shalion, which is, if someone ever came up to me unprompted and said, your reading sounds like Lois McMaster Bujold, I'd say thank you. I've done it. I did it, because it's not literary. It's almost literary in the same way that you can say Robin Hobb is literary, right? But it's just a good book. And then I just finished reading Tiago Abdallah's A Touch of Light, and he just launched this year. It's a good book, and it's really military heavy, but it isn't so military you're like, oh my gosh, another battle. It flows really well. So like, I suggest those 3 as you want to just see everything, and you get an indie in there as well. Here's what I'm going to give you, right? But yes, I do read Brandon Sanderson. I think he is very good at what he does, and he knows that. He is not to knock Stephen King, but Stephen King says he's not a great writer. He knows that. Stephen King knows that Stephen King is not a great writer, but he's a good writer. He's a good writer, and he delivers. Brandon Sanderson delivers. So there is a commercialism to his work, in that you're going to have something to read, but it also isn't being pumped out by a studio that isn't writing it. He is writing those words.
Mm, mm.
And so to be able to, I mean, I'm probably a little bit more up and down than Brandon is, because he mentioned, he says he's not an emotional person. So he
Mm.
can write for 8 hours a day and nothing's going to disturb him from that. I can't claim that, but I can try.
Most of us can't claim that.
No, exactly. He's a machine, but it's worth. But I'm far enough along. I haven't listened to Writing Excuses in a couple years, because I kind of absorbed everything I need to. I don't have to follow Brandon Sanderson's way, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like with any art, copying when you're in your infancy, when you're in your
Mm-hmm.
apprenticeship, copying the masters helps you set yourself up for your own success as you outgrow that. In the
Yes.
same way that your parents are going to grow you, they're going to help you get to 18, at which point you got to make your own decisions on what do you believe, who are you, what are you going to do now. There will always be artifacts of things that you absorbed from your parents, from masters you've copied. I don't know that we encourage it enough in writers. We encourage it in artists. You want to be a comic book artist? Go and just copy panels. copy panels until you can do them blind, and then you'll absorb a little bit of that artist into your psyche. And I think we need to encourage new writers, young writers, teenage writers, to be writing more fan fiction, because it will
Mm-hmm.
help them separate themselves later. Of course, I mean, my early stories I wrote, they were fan fiction. I never knew it, and I would never admit it. But if I had been told it's fan fiction, I would have been able to decouple myself from those inspirations better as I got older.
See, I was just about to ask you because we've heard on several of the most recent interviews people admit that they got started writing by writing fan fiction
Mm-hmm.
and how common that is. And I think you've put a perfect, just hit the nail on the head with why that is, because it really is copying a master's work, learning what that feels like, what that looks like, and the more, like any art, the more you do, the more it becomes your own, and the more you do, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
So yeah, just hearing that you've done that and then you are where you are is fantastic. Now, Kallattian Cycle is 6 books right now.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have all 6 written before you started releasing, or are you still
Yeah.
writing?
I'm still writing. I'm writing 7, 8, 9 right now. I'm gonna submit those to beta readers in probably a month, and so I'll probably see it in January. So I'll get to set it aside for a little while. But 1 through 6 are done and edited by a very well known editor. Did my final proof. Katherine, thank you. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure,
So,
truly.
yeah, I'm glad we were able to meet each other.
Me
Yeah.
too. I edit a lot and I love what I do, and just meeting authors and seeing worlds come to life is probably the best job besides, being a writer yourself. I tell people all the time I write for passion, but I edit to pay the bills, and it's
Mhm.
literally a dream job.
Yeah.
There's no shortage to the amazing stories in the world, and something about the Kallattian Cycle actually grabbed me right away because
Awesome.
it was just, if you're watching and you don't know anything about the series, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link. There's links in the description box. But Bounds and Promise is free right now, so you can
Yep.
go on Amazon and you
Until
can pick it
midnight
up for
tonight.
free. Oh,
Yep.
till midnight. Hurry!
Until midnight. So get it right now. This is book 2, Deeper Faith,
I
and
love these
then
covers so much,
book
by the
3.
way.
Thank you. Seed of Hope is book 3.
So those are the 3 that are out now.
Yep.
You could go grab Bonds and Promise for free right now. It's 10:12 Central Time right now,
Mm-hmm.
at night. But if you're watching the replay, you can still check it out on Amazon. Grab a copy there.
It's also on KD. It's on KU, so you can
Oh, nice.
if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it now for free as well. So
Nice. So
yeah,
no deadline for Kindle Unlimited people.
exactly.
Um, but yeah, it's got some classic epic fantasy, like sword, sorcery, chosen ones, and myths and legends and gods and prophecies all tied in together very beautifully. In a way, it made me feel when I was reading it like someone had taken a Final Fantasy book and merged it with like Sanderson and Tolkien, and was
Cool.
like, "Here's your world,"
Yeah.
and I was like, This is really neat. It follows a group of paladins. It follows these monks who are optionally blind, which brought me back to like my Morrowind years. And it's just
Yeah.
really, really, it'll sweep you away. So I will warn you that if you're, and I'm not saying this because I edited them, I'm saying this as a fellow reader. If you pick this book up, you may want to set some time apart from it, or you may end up staying way too late to read what happens in the book.
Yeah.
So with so many different, because this is a multi POV series,
Mhm.
that means there's multiple people that we're following. Was that really challenging? Did you like write one person's POV the whole time, or did you flip flop between them throughout?
So I mean, originally they were all blended as a single book, and had another fever dream where I figured out how I was going to split it up into the 3, but woke up, having fretted over it for several months, and I figured out how I could make it work. But I write strictly linearly. So I kind of figured out my back and forths and then wrote them, and so then that way I could switch from POV to POV just to give myself a break as well. So I might write this section of 4 chapters with Hanan, Clow, and his sister, and then switch over to a Jinnid chapter and then to a Kattiam chapter. And which is very helpful because some POVs are considerably harder to write. Kattiam is very hard for me to write. And not because she's boring to me, but because I have to get her right. and Hanan and Jinnid come out of me so much easier. I like to say Hanan is, what did I say? Hanan is my doubt, and Jinnid is my my silent aggravation with the world.
Yeah. So was it hard writing certain characters? I don't want to give spoilers away. Romance always comes up in these videos because some of these authors write romance and some don't. Mm-hmm. There's some romantic subplots going on with certain characters, and then of course not with others, because there are characters that take vows of chastity optionally, or vows of other things like not speaking, or pacifism, and they're not going to hurt anybody or anything. So is it difficult to keep the characters like not steering away from their vows accidentally? For example, like Kattiam at one point, I'm just like, oh gosh, I wonder if she's going to veer that way or not.
Yeah, you know, it's a difficult question. One, I'm not good at writing romance. I'll admit that right now. The romantic situation that shows up in 4, 5, and 6 kind of showed up out of nowhere. It happened, and I was like, okay, well, this might be a cute thing. Well, it's kind of spiraled out of control, not in a, oh man, they're throwing each other over each other. In fact, they end up having to leave each other for a while, but which is much farther down, so that doesn't matter. But it's a cute courtship between them, and it was fun to write because it did come naturally, and they were kind of going up against the plot. Plot I did not have planned, and so actually a lot has changed a lot of what Hanan will have to do in the long run. But we're talking many books out. I did toy for a little bit on seeing what might happen between Kattiam and the person you're talking about. It's probably not going to happen because their responsibilities get in the way a lot, and that's a heavy theme is responsibility in the book. I probably deal more with self-doubt in the characters than anything. So there's definitely times of self-doubt that characters are dealing with, which ends up being, why would I even bother being in a relationship? I can't even deal with myself right now. So I think that comes up a lot more often than that.
Yeah. It's a very character-driven story, and characters change a lot, even in the course of the first 3 books that are out now. There are just unpredictable changes to these characters. So with the big cast that you have, is there a character that was your favorite to write or most fun to write?
Jinnid is my favorite to write because he was not supposed to be a main character. Back in the old 2010 draft, Ralia was Rawl, and he was the main character, and he was boring as dirt. And Jinnid was basically Merrick, was Dane Merrick. So he was the chauvinist, and he couldn't stand that. And Soraya, it was Jinnid, Rawl, and Soraya were traveling, and Jinnid wouldn't give her the time of day because she's a woman. And eventually they had it out, and he realized, and it was a really petty story. It didn't work. So when I rewrote this book, which was after I killed all my darlings and said, okay, redo everything, change the characters. Rawl's not a main character anymore. Now it's Ralia. Hanan's here, and Hanan just kind of developed out of nowhere. Well, then I set Jinnid in a totally different part of the world and said, you get your own plot, see what happens. And it just flowed. It was like, oh, you just needed to be unshackled. And unshackling him and taking all of those bad personality traits he had and putting them into a nemesis in order to create a counter for Jinnid, who's, even though he has the vow of chastity, it's not really a thing. He probably chose the wrong vow in the first place. That wasn't his sin that he needed to deal with. He probably should have chosen pacifism more than anything, but he's a good soldier. and that's just how the cookie crumbles. But doing that unshackled him and made him just explode as a character. He's so much more fun to write. I love writing writing the scenes when he talks to pretty much anybody, because even though he's subservient to anybody he's talking to, he still has an opinion and he makes it known. So you get a chance to see a normal schlub's opinion of what's going on around them.
Right.
Yeah.
Luna's on and says characters that write themselves really can make the best, though.
Yeah. Yeah, they really can. I love that. Yeah, same sort of happened with Loic and Kavian, and they're two twins who have taken the vow of silence. They only have their first names because when you take a vow of silence, you drop your last name. But they're really fun to write, and because they're just, they're not even the comedic relief. They're just the people they're just the two friends you have who laugh at everything stupid you do. but they still love you. They love you for your heart. Bless Janet's little heart.
And I love that you included the diversity in there. The monks who can't see, and then you've got the paladins who choose to use sign language, and that is just brilliantly incorporated in the book. Was it difficult going outside sort of the more normal, I'd say normal, but I'd say more common epic fantasy of everybody talks, everybody has similar dialects, and now it's like we've got some very different dialects, we've got sign language, we've got everything going on in here.
Yeah. I really enjoy writing that. Blindness is a lot harder to write. So Soraya's scenes, when you get she gets little tiny POVs to start. So she's a blind monk, and so she has voluntarily wrapped her eyes and she can't see. But it's really fun it's fun and difficult to write her scenes because I have to try to describe everything without any sight. So what more is she going to notice? There's lots of sounds, but the sign language is really fun to write, not just because of the world building of how their sign language works. I won't say anything more than that, but that Jinnid doesn't speak it because he's got sausage fingers and he's never bothered. And he finally discovers you got to learn, man. And so he's assigned to learn it. And so it was really fun for about the second half of Seed of Deeper Faith. He's starting to understand it, but Loic and Kavian, when it has their signs being written out in italics, they're talking in broken language, and then it slowly evolves into full language, not because they're speaking in broken language, but it's because that's what Jinnid is reading.
Wow.
And it evolves into by Seed of Hope, they're talking in full sentences. They will still drop single word commands sometimes, like you go now. They don't bother with syntax at that point because that's what they're doing. Come on, let's go. We got to get to this thing. So, but then you have to take into consideration, okay, we're in the middle of a fight. Do you stop and talk? You give a command. I can't do that. Yeah, but what'd you have for breakfast? You just don't do that. That's not appropriate. So how do you say and I'm doing this with my hands because that's actually how they talk. Is their spell? It's almost more alphabetical or even Chinese in a sense, in the way that they're making their words. So they're going to say a quick no, let's do this, and move on. I love doing that. It's really fun, and then putting in the nuance between the two twins, even in how they it's more mannerisms than what they say, right? Because they're going to be using the same language. You can't accent to an extent until you get into their actual tone, but it is a lot of show, and that's fun. It's just making sure I'm showing and not telling, like I'm doing right now.
Well, you definitely had to practice showing versus telling a lot. If you're watching and you're a reader, you're like, what's that? That's where you're not summarizing. She felt angry. They could tell from their face that they looked blah, blah, blah. And instead expressing what facial expressions people have or what the atmosphere is. And it can be very tricky as an author to work on that. So sort of to that effect, because I was going to ask if there are authors that are watching this that are trying to incorporate more diversity into their books, were there any resources that you went to sort of hone that world building, that showing versus telling?
No, but on the subject of diversity, one of the things I did with humanity is because there are outside problems of non-humans, like the orcs. They're not orcs, but the orcs
Yeah,
who are
yeah.
invading all the time, and the wolf people who are invading all the time, is having that as an outside source is going to automatically create a unity inside of humanity, which is often not shown. It's like, well, but we're still against each other. It's like, are you stupid? We're literally being attacked from an outside force. So it was much easier for me to say, this group of people is from here, but you're going to see them everywhere, and they're constantly. So there's much more of a melting pot across the continent because of that. But you still have prejudices, and how do you convey that without being an absolute jerk of an author? You can do that just by, what do you do? And I did a lot of that by taking new looks, so it wouldn't hit too close to home and allow you, in the same way, like if you've ever read the graphic novel Mouse. The reason Mouse works, it's a retelling of the Holocaust, but it's an anthropological anthropomorphized version. They all have mouse heads. The Nazis have cat heads. So because they're not human, the story is able to do things that are really hard to read, but are easier because you're observing from the outside. And so, like, I gave a whole group of humans basically incredibly thick hair, like to the point of almost being, they can't. You got to shave your head every day if you're a paladin, every day, as opposed to once a week, because it grows in so fast and so quick. So you're gonna have people who are gonna make fun of somebody who has thick hair because we're stupid and we do that. So, but it let me do something that's a totally different outside. It's kind of like in Brandon Sanderson, the Thalians have like eyebrows that they weave into their hair, and so it's like, oh, it's a really cool thing. But that people are like, oh, there, and then, but other people are gonna look at it and say, oh, that's really those eyebrows. I don't know. It's like, yeah, but until you meet a Thalian and you're a friend with one, you're like, oh, maybe I should put some hair into my eyebrows too. That's pretty cool. And it's just a chance to do something fun too. And it's like in George R. R. Martin, I know it's a disease, but having like the dragon scale. I mean, how cool would it be to have a whole group of people who are dragon scaled as not because they're dragons, but because it's just their skin grows. It's just cool. And that's stuff you can do in fantasy you can't do in anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So Thrice is in bookstores. We've had an interview with you and your wife, Patricia. Yes, there it is. And we just talked a little bit about how you got your books in bookstores. So if you're an author watching and you want to see that video, that's in the Indie Author Behind the Scenes playlist. But for readers, are you planning on putting the Kallattian Cycle in Barnes & Noble as well?
That one is not going to be for now. I've got some things in the works that I would like to get it towards Barnes & Noble. When I do that, I'm going to take it the extra step and actually contact Barnes & Noble corporate, where you send in several book copies, and they inspect it and say, yep, this looks like an actual book. You're like, told you. And then they clear it, and then it becomes available to all the Barnes & Nobles. It doesn't mean necessarily the Barnes & Nobles will buy it as a corporation, but now the bookstores are more likely to get it in and not count it as non-destroyable indie. Yeah. Yeah.
Which, for writer speak, that just means that they're more likely to take a chance on ordering your book than they would if they're like, what do we do with it if it doesn't sell?
Exactly.
But Thrice is. So if you have a local Barnes & Noble and you're wanting to read one of Andrew's works, you can always go into Barnes & Noble and ask. And those kinds of things really help indie authors, because the bookstores are like, oh, people are asking for these people's books. The more people that ask, the more likely they are to stock them. And then some I've heard will even order a book for you, even if they don't stock it. And then they're like, oh, well, we've had this many orders. So it all helps.
And you can always get your books into Ingram. Like if you're doing your books through Ingram Spark, it's in the Ingram system. So any independent bookstore can get it. If you go to conventions, some convention bookstores want you to bring the books and sell it to them right there. And then then you come back after the con and they sell you back the books they didn't sell. But a lot of those bookstores will ask you to pre-contact them so they can order it through Ingram and have it available, and then they still leave with it too because it's their book. So that's a good resource, is to make sure that you're in Ingram with your print copies so that any independent bookstore can get it.
Yes, absolutely. and we'll have to do another video another time about Ingram. But
Yeah.
I did have a couple questions, and I know we're
Yeah.
running short on time. So one was actually left over from our last interview that we
Yeah.
didn't get to. So sorry to the asker. But it's, how do you manage to write as somebody who works and has a family too, especially
Hmm.
since your spouse also writes?
Yeah. So I write. I get up at 5 or 5:30, tiredness dependent, and I write until 7 or 8 in the morning. So before I go to work, and that's my writing time. If I'm in full draft mode, I'm probably writing anywhere from 5 to very rarely 1,200 words an hour. So I can pop out 2,400 words in a day, and that's a lot. That's a lot for anybody. But that's why I strongly suggest set yourself a small and not meetable but beatable daily count goal. That's how you get there. Because once you've built a habit up, it's so much easier to wake up at 5 a.m. Or if you're a night owl, writing for 1 hour before you go to bed will empty your mind and let you sleep so much better too. So there's different ways to do that. But if you set yourself for, nope, I know I can do 500 words in 2 hours, great. If you end up writing 1,200 words, you beat it. You're doing great. Keep going, because 1,000 words is still 20,000 words a month if you take weekends off.
Absolutely. And every little bit, 20,000 words is almost halfway to a novel if you're looking
Yep.
at, just the numbers.
Yep.
But I like what you said earlier, and I'll bring this back. A novel is going to be how long it needs to be. So
Mm-hmm.
don't say, oh, well, my novel's 50,000 words long, it's not long enough, and I write fantasy, that's okay. And if your
Mm-hmm.
novel is 200,000 words, as long as there's no boring, I'm just going to use myself here, a really long 5-page pickling scene. They got cut out.
You put that on
Nobody
your
needs
website,
to
though,
walk
right?
away from
You
my
put it
book
on
and
your
know how to
website, though,
pickle
right?
anything. No, nobody's read the pickling scene except the developmental editors who helped me cut it.
Put it up. Put it
Uh,
up for people who really want to know how to pickle
that's
in your
right. If
fantasy
you
book.
want to know
Yeah.
how to pickle, the
Yeah.
Vow the Twisted Fate style. But
Yes.
the other
Written
one
in
was,
prose.
is Thrice part of the Kallattian Cycle world, or is this a brand new world?
It is not. It's entirely different. It is a Slavic fantasy that takes place in a very small part of a world that is not a totally different pantheon, totally different world. But I kind of challenged myself to write in a subgenre I was slightly less familiar with, and not a giant sweeping map wrecking quest. It takes place actually in basically the size of Crimea. So it's a very small, when you can get somewhere in less than 3 days, that's reasonable because it's a very small part of the world. So it is a different book, and it is part of a trilogy.
Nice. So, yeah, Thrice is first. Then in
Hmm.
that series, you can pick it
Yep.
up. And then, of course, Bonds and Promise, which is free till midnight, and the rest of the Kallattian Cycle that's out for now. Now, obviously, more being drafted. There they are, the first three. Um, Definitely get these while you can.
They all come in audiobooks too. So
Oh,
if
and
you
you did
prefer
the audio
audiobooks,
yourself, right?
yep, I do the audiobooks myself. And if you get it through KU, you can also add on the audiobook so you can do immersive experience. Um,
Oh,
I
wow.
try to release my audiobooks on release day for every book I write. Um, so yeah, all three formats are all available.
That's wonderful. And if you'd like to connect with Andrew and Patricia both, even though Patricia
Mhm.
doesn't write fantasy, Patricia's where you go for the historical fiction side. You can find Andrew's link in the description box, and you can also, through Andrew's link, I'm sure, find Patricia's link there too.
Yep.
Um, but thank you so much for
Thank
hopping
you.
on and talking to us about the story. I've been so excited for this interview for weeks.
And I kept getting sick.
And me too.
Yeah.
And sorry, everybody. I'm still getting over COVID. It takes so long to get over this stuff.
Hmm.
But yeah. So thank
Almost
you
there.
so much. And
Thank
thank you
you.
for the viewers. If you're watching the replay, feel free to leave any questions you have for Andrew. And I will pop back on to YouTube with Andrew's answers to those questions as soon as I can. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.